The reopening of Luna's case began not with a grand announcement, but with a whisper that crawled through Los Angeles like smoke through a narrow alley. Months had passed since her death had been ruled an accident, a tragic end to a brilliant yet turbulent young woman. The file had been closed, the evidence sealed, and those involved had tried, in their own fractured ways, to move on. But tragedy, especially in the Forrester orbit, never stayed buried for long. It began when a new witness came forward, a man who claimed to have seen everything that night. His statement was clear and devastating. The crash that killed Luna was no accident. Dylan had not lost control of the car. He had driven toward her with intent. The news hit like an earthquake. In the quiet morning hours, as the sun cut sharp lines across the Forrester estate, Steffi sat frozen before the television, watching the broadcast replay the investigator's words. She had convinced herself that the tragedy was over, that justice, however imperfect, had been served. The confession Dylan gave months ago had been emotional, believable, a mix of guilt and grief that seemed to close the case neatly. But now, those old fears, those late-night doubts, came rushing back. Something in her had never fully accepted that the crash was random. Something had always felt off about that night. The timing, the lack of witnesses, the way the details seemed to shift like sand. Finn's reaction was quieter but heavier, like the calm surface of water before a storm. As a doctor, his life had been built on observation and truth. Yet as a husband and father, he had learned the art of silence, of protecting those he loved, even when it meant burying parts of himself. When he read the statement in the official report, his heart sank. The witness claimed that moments before impact, Dylan's headlights swerved deliberately, that her expression wasn't one of panic, but of recognition, like she had seen something that made her choose that path. It was a claim that upended everything he thought he knew about that night. Dylan had always been a complex figure, a mix of fragility and fury, a woman who could charm a room and terrify it seconds later. Her confession after Luna's death had shocked everyone. She had claimed to lose control, that Luna had appeared in the middle of the road too suddenly. She wept through every interrogation, her words erratic but seemingly sincere. Finn had treated her for shock afterward, seen the tremor in her hands, the haunted vacancy in her eyes. But now, reading that a witness had seen her act intentionally, he felt the first fracture of doubt. Had he misjudged her? Had he, in trying to believe in redemption, ignored the truth? Steffi's turmoil ran deeper. Luna's death had always been personal. She had seen herself in that young woman, the same hunger, the same ambition, the same fatal attraction to chaos. Luna had been a spark in the Forrester world, both admired and envied. And when she died, Steffi felt not just sorrow, but guilt. She had been one of the last people to see Luna alive, had argued with her about designs, about trust, about Dylan. That memory had burned itself into her. Luna's defiance, her parting words about knowing something she shouldn't. Now, with this new revelation, those words took on a terrifying clarity. The official reopening of the case came swiftly. The police held a press conference, confirming that new evidence had surfaced, along with a credible eyewitness. They named Dylan as a person of renewed interest, not merely a negligent driver but a potential suspect in a homicide investigation. The city, always hungry for scandal, feasted on the news. Luna's face returned to the tabloids, her story revived with cruel fascination. The Angel of Forrester, the headlines called her, juxtaposed against pictures of Dylan, labeled the devil in disguise. When Finn arrived home that evening, he found Steffi sitting by the window, her reflection ghosted against the dark glass. She didn't turn when he entered. "Do you believe it?" she asked quietly. "That Dylan did it on purpose?" Finn hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted. "But if she didn't, then someone made her believe she did." And that was the question that began to consume them both, not whether Dylan was guilty, but whether she had been used. As the investigation deepened, Dylan herself began to unravel. The reemergence of the case tore open wounds she had tried desperately to seal. She started having flashes, blurred, disjointed fragments of that night. A scream, headlights, A shadow in the trees, a second car's reflection in her windshield. Sometimes she remembered Luna's face, but not the impact. Other times, she saw a figure standing by the roadside, unmoving, watching. The memories came in waves, each one more disorienting than the last. Her therapist called it trauma resurfacing. Dylan called it punishment. When she was brought in for questioning again, the detectives were different this time. Colder, sharper. They played the witness's statement back to her, word for word, waiting for her to crack. "He saw you accelerate," one of them said. "He saw your hands tighten on the wheel. He saw fear, not panic." Dylan shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't Luna I was looking at," she said. "It was someone else." The room went silent. That admission changed everything. Finn, being consulted informally because of his involvement with the family, pored over the medical reports again. There were inconsistencies he hadn't noticed before, damage patterns on Luna's body that suggested she had turned sharply, as if reacting to something outside the car. Finn's clinical mind began piecing it together. The angle of the impact, the missing security footage from the nearby gas station, the deleted call logs from Luna's phone. There was no denying it anymore. There had been another presence on that road. Someone who had been erased from every official account. Steffi, for her part, began her own quiet investigation. She spoke to people Luna had worked with, piecing together fragments of gossip and fear. Luna had been working on a private project, a collection outside the Forrester name, one she had intended to debut independently. It was whispered that she had found a backer, someone powerful and secretive, but that she'd begun to back out just days before her death. The rumor was that she had threatened to expose something about financial manipulation and stolen designs. Steffi's heart clenched as she realized the implications. Luna hadn't just died, she'd been silenced. The deeper they dug, the darker the web became. Finn uncovered that the witness who had come forward had ties to a company that had once competed with Forrester Creations. The so-called eyewitness might not have been a good Samaritan at all, but a pawn in a larger scheme. Yet his description of the second car, of the figure on the road, was too specific to dismiss. Every thread they pulled revealed another knot. Dylan, meanwhile, began deteriorating. Her nights were filled with restless dreams, her waking hours haunted by flashes of memory she couldn't trust. One night, she called Finn, her voice shaking. "I remember now," she said. "There was someone else. Someone standing near the trees. I thought it was Luna at first, but it wasn't. It was a man. And he smiled at me." Before Finn could respond, the line went dead. By the time he reached her apartment, she was gone. Her disappearance reignited the firestorm. The press called it proof of guilt. The police called it flight. But Finn knew better. He had seen true guilt before. It didn't run, it collapsed. He believed Dylan had vanished not out of fear of punishment, but fear of the truth. Whatever she had remembered was dangerous enough to get her killed. Steffi tried to remain composed, but inside, she was fracturing. The case had reignited every fear she had buried about the world she lived in, that beneath the glamour and ambition of Forrester Creations lay corruption, deceit, and perhaps something even worse. As she read over Luna's final text messages, she noticed one in particular, sent just minutes before the crash. "I saw him again. He knows what I found." Him. The single word sent chills through her. The more they searched, the more it became clear that this was not just about Luna's death or Dylan's guilt. It was about power. Finn found financial irregularities tied to a shell corporation, a silent investor linked to several Forrester subsidiaries. Steffi traced the connection to an offshore account registered under a name that made her blood run cold: Spencer Industries. Bill Spencer. The revelation tore through their fragile calm. It couldn't be coincidence. Bill had been circling the Forresters for years, exploiting every scandal to tighten his grip. But could he have been involved in Luna's death? Finn refused to believe it at first, but the evidence grew impossible to ignore. The witness had been paid through one of Bill's subsidiary accounts. The deleted footage from the gas station had been traced to a server owned by a Spencer tech firm. And the mysterious figure Luna had texted about, tall, silver-haired, confident, matched descriptions of a man seen leaving a private meeting with her just days before she died. When Steffi confronted Bill, he did not deny knowing Luna. "She came to me," he said evenly. "She had something to sell. Something big. But she got in over her head." His words were rehearsed, his eyes cold. "You should be careful, Steffi. The past has a way of swallowing people whole." That night, Steffi couldn't sleep. She watched Finn pacing the living room, papers and photographs scattered across the floor. "If Bill's involved," he said quietly, "then Dylan isn't the villain. She's the witness." Days later, Dylan was found, alive, but barely, on the outskirts of the desert, disoriented, dehydrated, and terrified. When Finn reached her in the hospital, she gripped his hand with trembling fingers. "It wasn't me," she whispered. "It was all set up. He made me believe I killed her." Finn's pulse raced. "Who?" he asked. Her eyes filled with tears. "The man in the car. The one who said he'd protect Luna. The one who promised she'd never talk." She tried to speak his name, but her voice broke before she could finish. Outside the hospital room, Steffi stood in the hallway, her reflection pale against the sterile glass. She realized then that the truth would destroy more than reputations. It would tear apart everything they had built. But she also knew that silence had already cost too much. The investigation pressed on. Bill's name never appeared in the final reports, buried under layers of legal maneuvering and influence. Dylan, traumatized and unfit to testify, was quietly institutionalized. The case was once again ruled inconclusive. But for Steffi and Finn, nothing would ever be the same. They had seen too much, learned too much about the price of protection and the weight of truth. Some nights, when Steffi stood by the ocean and watched the tide pull back, she swore she could hear Luna's voice in the wind, soft, accusing, unfinished. And in the heart of Los Angeles, where the line between justice and survival had always been blurred, one truth remained: no secret stays buried forever. Because the man who smiled from the shadows that night was still out there, watching, waiting. And the story of Luna's death was far from over. Dylan's arrest came at dawn, the hour when the city still held its breath between night and morning. Police lights flared against the soft gray of Los Angeles fog, illuminating the edges of her apartment complex like the glow of some distant, merciless judgment. She didn't resist. She stood in the doorway barefoot, her hair tangled, her eyes hollow, as the officers read her rights. There was no shouting, no protest, only silence, and the sound of handcuffs closing, like the final note of a song she had been humming for too long. News broke within the hour. Dylan Hayes arrested in Luna Forrester's death. Case reopened after explosive new evidence. The words looped across every channel, every screen, every social feed. Forrester Creations became a fortress of whispers. Finn, who had treated Dylan just weeks earlier, felt the air leave his lungs when he saw the footage. Steffi, watching beside him, froze completely. It was one thing to suspect, another to see her taken away in chains. The interrogation room was cold and metallic, stripped of humanity. Dylan sat across from the lead detective, her wrists trembling as the metal cuffs dug into her skin. She said she wanted a lawyer, but even as she did, her eyes kept darting to the mirror behind the detective. She knew they were watching.
"Finn. Steffi.
The world. Her voice broke when she finally spoke.
It wasn't me," she said.
"I swear to you, I didn't kill her." But her own confession from months ago echoed louder than her denial now. The video existed, her tear-streaked face, her shaking hands, her voice sang, "It was my fault. I did it." That was the narrative the world had chosen. And now, no one wanted to rewrite it. For Finn, the lines between doctor, witness, and man began to blur. He had seen trauma, delusion, even psychosis, but something about Dylan's eyes unsettled him. When he looked into them, he saw a truth trapped beneath terror. He visited her in custody under the guise of medical evaluation. The guards led her into a sterile room, her hands bound, her voice barely a whisper. You told them I remembered things, she said.
Ida.
But it's not what they think.
Finn leaned closer.
Then tell me, he said quietly. Dylan hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the camera in the corner. He's watching, she murmured. He always is. That single pronoun, he, lodged itself in Finn's mind like a shard of glass. Meanwhile, Steffi faced her own battlefield. The press had begun circling Forrester Creations again, probing for comment, for blood. Every tragedy tied to their name became currency in the city's gossip economy. You need to make a statement, Hope urged, but Steffi shook her head. Not yet. We don't even know what's real. Still, she could feel the walls closing in. Bill Spencer's quiet smirk during a chance encounter at a fundraiser haunted her. Tough time for the family, he'd said smoothly. But don't worry, truth always finds a buyer. The truth, however, refused to stay still. The day after Dylan's arrest, the district attorney's office announced that new forensic evidence had surfaced, a fragment of paint from a second vehicle, recovered from Luna's clothing, previously overlooked. The color didn't match Dylan's car. It matched something else entirely, a luxury SUV registered to a corporate shell connected to Spencer Holdings. The discovery reframed everything. If a second vehicle had been there, then Dylan's confession had been coerced, or worse, orchestrated.
Finn's gut twisted.
He requested access to the lab results, using his medical background as justification, and confirmed the match himself. It was undeniable. Someone had altered the crash report. Someone powerful. When he confronted Steffi with the findings, her face drained of color. If that's true, she said slowly, then Dylan wasn't the driver who killed Luna. She was the distraction.
Finn nodded grimly.
And whoever was in that SUV, they're the reason Luna's dead. They both knew what came next. Dylan, locked in her cell, received an unmarked envelope slid through the bars late one night. Inside was a photograph, grainy, taken from a distance. It showed a figure standing beside Luna's crashed car, moments before the police arrived. The face was obscured by darkness, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, tailored suit, confidence in the stance. Beneath the photo was a single line written in black ink, "Say nothing and you live." The next morning, Dylan refused to speak. Her attorney couldn't break her silence. Neither could Finn during another visit. "He'll hurt you," she whispered when he pressed her for details. "He already has." Finn realized then that Dylan wasn't just a suspect. She was a pawn. And pawns were expendable. As the case gained traction, the courtroom turned into a stage. The prosecution painted Dylan as unhinged, consumed by jealousy and guilt. The defense tried to argue coercion, mental instability, manipulation. But what truly electrified the proceedings was when Finn, breaking medical protocol and risking his license, took the stand. "There's evidence of a second car," he said firmly. And it was covered up. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Steffi, sitting in the back, clenched her fists. Across the room, Bill Spencer's lawyer leaned forward, whispering into a phone. The judge called for recess, but the damage was done. The narrative had shifted. That night, Finn's car was tampered with, brake lines slashed, his tires slashed just enough to look accidental. He survived only because he noticed the warning light on the dash before entering the freeway. When he returned home, Steffi was waiting, panic etched into every line of her face. "We need to stop," she said. "This isn't worth it." Finn met her gaze, his expression dark. "Luna thought the same thing," he said. "And look what happened to her." 2 days later, the witness who had reopened the case was found dead in his apartment. Official cause: overdose. Unofficially, execution. The police closed the thread quietly, but Finn and Steffi understood what it meant. Someone was cleaning house. Inside her cell, Dylan began to deteriorate. She scratched messages into the wall, cryptic phrases that made little sense to the guards but would later send shockwaves through those who read them. The road wasn't empty. She saw him first. "The deal was never for me." When Finn saw the photographs of her cell wall, his breath caught. They weren't just random words, they were coordinates. A location. A remote warehouse near the outskirts of the city, owned by an inactive subsidiary of Spencer Holdings. He and Steffi drove there under cover of darkness. The air was thick with dust and the smell of oil. Inside, they found files, boxes labeled with initials, dates, surveillance photos. One folder was marked LF, 2025.
Luna Forrester.
Inside were copies of her medical records, private sketches, emails she had written to a journalist days before she died. One line stood out. "If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. He knows what I found." Before they could process the discovery, headlights cut through the darkness. A car approached, sleek, silent, familiar. Bill Spencer stepped out. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. His tone wasn't angry, just final. Steffi stepped forward. "You did this," she said, her voice trembling with rage. Bill's gaze hardened. "I did what was necessary. Luna was going to expose something that would have destroyed more than just this family. You think you understand the game, Steffi, but you don't. You never did." Finn moved protectively in front of her. "You used Dylan," he said. "You made her think she was guilty." Bill's expression didn't change. "She was guilty of being weak," he said. "Everyone plays their role. Hers was to take the fall. Yours." His sentence cut short as Steffi raised her phone, the recording app glowing red. The standoff lasted only seconds before the sound of distant sirens filled the air. Bill turned and walked away, vanishing into the night, leaving behind only the echo of his warning. You don't win by telling the truth, you win by surviving it. Back at the station, Dylan's attorney presented the recording. The prosecution's case imploded overnight. Dylan was released the next morning, pale, trembling, but free. Yet freedom did not mean peace. As she stepped outside, flashes from cameras blinded her and questions rained down. "Did you kill Luna? Were you framed?" She didn't answer. She simply whispered. She saw him first, before disappearing into the crowd. For Finn and Steffi, the victory was hollow. Bill's empire remained untouched, his influence too vast to dismantle. The police investigation stalled again, labeled inconclusive. Luna's memory became a cautionary tale, her truth twisted by power. But Dylan's arrest and release marked something irreversible. The illusion of safety was gone. Steffi woke each night to the sound of phantom tires screeching. Finn stared at his hands as if questioning what they had cost him, and somewhere in the city, Dylan sat in a dark apartment, staring at an envelope she'd received without a return address. Inside was a single photo of Luna, smiling. And on the back, in a familiar scrawl, was written, "You're still part of this."
It was not the end.
It was only the next beginning of a war that no one could walk away from without blood on their hands.